Maria Santos had been invisible for so long, she sometimes wondered if she truly existed at all. For 3 years, she had cleaned the marble floors of the Henderson mansion, polished the crystal chandeliers, and dusted the family portraits that stared down at her with cold, judgmental eyes. The wealthy family barely acknowledged her presence, treating her like a piece of furniture that happened to move and clean. But invisibility had its advantages. People said things around Maria they would never say to someone they considered important. They forgot she spoke perfect English, assuming her quiet demeanor and thick accent meant she understood nothing. They discussed business deals, family secrets, and private matters, as if she weren't there at all. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos wasn't really Maria Santos. Her real name was Elena Rodriguez, and before she became a maid, she had been Staff Sergeant Rodriguez of the Navy SEALs, one of only a handful of women to ever complete the brutal training program. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart, and could put a bullet through a dime at 500 yards. The transformation from soldier to maid hadn't been her choice. 2 years ago, she had witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see during her final deployment. A deal gone wrong, innocent civilians caught in crossfire, and orders that came from people who should have known better. When she tried to report it through proper channels, she found herself facing threats instead of justice. The message was clear: disappear, or be disappeared. So Elena Rodriguez died on paper, and Maria Santos was born. She traded her rifle for a mop, her combat boots for worn sneakers, and her military precision for the careful, invisible movements of domestic help. She found work through an agency that didn't ask too many questions, and the Henderson family hired her without ever really looking at her. James Henderson owned 3 tech companies and had government contracts worth millions. His wife, Patricia, spent her days shopping and planning charity events that were more about being seen than helping anyone. Their teenage son, Marcus, was home from boarding school for Christmas break, already showing signs of the entitled arrogance that ran in the family. The house itself was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Located on 50 acres outside the city, it had state-of-the-art security systems, cameras everywhere, and a staff of guards who tried to look like gardeners and maintenance workers. Elena had counted at least 12 armed men on the property during her time there, all trying to blend in but failing to hide their military bearing. She had pieced together enough conversations to know that Henderson wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in arms dealing, selling weapons to groups that probably shouldn't have them. The Christmas party he was hosting wasn't just a social gathering, it was a meeting of some very dangerous people. Elena had planned to finish her shift that Christmas Eve and disappear. She had saved enough money to start over somewhere else, maybe Canada or Mexico. She was tired of being invisible, tired of pretending to be someone she wasn't. But as she was cleaning the library that afternoon, she overheard a conversation that changed everything. Henderson was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to someone he called the Colonel. Elena recognized the code names being mentioned. These were locations where humanitarian groups operated, places where innocent people were trying to help refugees and displaced families. "The shipment goes out tomorrow night," Henderson was saying. "Your people will have enough firepower to clear out those bleeding hearts once and for all. Can't have them interfering with the mining operations." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew those locations. She had friends who worked with those humanitarian groups, people who had saved her life, who had shown her what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. As she continued cleaning, moving quietly around the room, Henderson continued his conversation. The plan was simple and brutal. The weapons Henderson was selling would be used to attack refugee camps on Christmas Day, when the world would be distracted and the news cycle would be slow. Hundreds of innocent people would die. Also, Henderson and his associates could clear the land for mining operations. The Christmas party wasn't just a meeting, it was a celebration. These people were toasting to mass murder, planned for the holiest day of the Christian calendar. That night, Elena sat in her small room above the garage, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She had spent 2 years hiding, 2 years trying to forget who she used to be. But some things couldn't be forgotten, and some things couldn't be ignored. She opened the small box hidden under her floorboards. Inside was everything she had left of her old life. Her dog tags, a photo of her unit, and a disassembled Remington 700 sniper rifle, broken down into pieces that looked like random mechanical parts to anyone who didn't know better. Elena had told herself she was done fighting, done being a soldier. But as she began assembling the rifle with the muscle memory that never left, she realized she had been wrong. You don't stop being a soldier just because you take off the uniform. The Christmas party would begin tomorrow evening. Important people would arrive. Deals would be made. And innocent people would be condemned to death. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed the maid was really just a maid. As midnight approached on Christmas Eve, Elena finished assembling her rifle and began planning. She studied the layout of the house, memorized the security patterns, and identified the key players who would be attending. She had been invisible for so long, but tomorrow night, she would make herself seen. The mission was simple. Stop the weapons deal and save the innocent lives that hung in the balance. The execution would be anything but simple. She would be outnumbered, outgunned, and completely alone. But Elena Rodriguez had been in worse situations before, and she had never failed a mission yet. Outside her window, snow began to fall, covering the mansion grounds in pristine white. It was beautiful and peaceful, the kind of Christmas Eve that people wrote songs about. But Elena knew that by this time tomorrow, that peaceful white snow might be stained red. She checked her rifle one more time, ran through her mental checklist of targets and escape routes, and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow would be the longest day of her life, and possibly the last. But for the first time in 2 years, Elena Rodriguez felt truly alive. She had found her purpose again, found something worth fighting for. The maid was about to become a soldier once more, and heaven help anyone who got in her way. Christmas Day arrived with a bitter cold that seemed to seep through the very walls of the mansion. Elena woke before dawn, her body automatically falling into the military routine she had trained herself to forget. Push-ups, stretches, mental preparation. Today wasn't about being Maria Santos, the quiet maid. Today was about being Elena Rodriguez, Navy SEAL. The guests began arriving at 4 in the afternoon. Elena watched from the kitchen window as black sedans and armored SUVs pulled up the circular driveway. She recognized some faces from intelligence briefings she had attended years ago. Men who sold death for profit, who treated human lives like items on a balance sheet. The colonel arrived at 5:30. A tall man with silver hair and dead eyes who moved with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Elena had tracked him through 3 conflicts, always one step behind his trail of destruction. Today, that would end. Henderson greeted his guests in the main parlor, a room Elena had cleaned countless times. Now she watched from the servants' passages that ran behind the walls, spaces designed to let the help move unseen. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very invisibility that had protected her for 2 years was now her greatest tactical advantage. "Gentlemen, welcome to what I believe will be our most profitable venture yet," Henderson announced, raising a glass of champagne. The assembled group of arms dealers, corrupt officials, and mercenaries toasted eagerly. Elena moved through the hidden passages like a ghost, positioning herself above the main parlor. Through a carefully concealed vent, she could see and hear everything. Henderson had set up a presentation showing maps of the refugee camps, satellite photos of the humanitarian operations, and detailed plans for the attack. "The beauty of Christmas Day timing," the colonel was explaining, "is that response times will be slower, emergency services will be understaffed, international attention will be minimal, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it will be too late to matter." Elena's finger tightened on her rifle trigger. One shot could end the colonel right now, but that would only alert the others and potentially allow the weapons shipment to proceed. She needed to be smarter, more surgical in her approach. The presentation continued, each detail making Elena's blood boil. These weren't military targets they were planning to hit. They were schools, hospitals, aid stations, places where doctors and teachers were spending their Christmas Day helping people who had lost everything. "The weapons are currently being loaded onto the transport ship," Henderson announced. "By tomorrow morning, Our associates will have everything they need to clear the area permanently. That's when Elena learned the timeline had accelerated. The original plan had been for the weapons to ship out tomorrow night, giving her more time to plan. Instead, the cargo was leaving the port in 3 hours. She had to act now, or hundreds of innocent people would die. Elena made her way back to her room, moving through the passages she had memorized over months of invisible servitude. In her small space above the garage, she changed from her maid's uniform into dark clothing she had kept hidden. She strapped on tactical gear she had slowly acquired over 2 years, piece by piece, never enough at once to attract attention. Her mission had 2 objectives: stop the weapons shipment and neutralize the key players in the operation. The first meant getting to the port and preventing that cargo from leaving. The second meant dealing with the men currently celebrating in the parlor below. Elena decided to hit the port first. If she could destroy or delay the weapons shipment, it would buy time for the humanitarian groups to evacuate or increase security. She slipped out of the mansion grounds using a route she had scouted months ago, a blind spot in the security coverage that the guards had never noticed. The port was 20 miles away, but Elena had prepared for this contingency. Hidden in an abandoned barn, 3 miles from the mansion, was a motorcycle she had bought and modified for exactly this type of situation. It roared to life on the first try, and she raced through the snowy countryside toward the harbor. The weapons were being loaded onto a cargo ship called the Northern Star, a vessel that regularly transported agricultural equipment to conflict zones. Elena arrived to find the loading almost complete, massive containers being lifted by crane onto the ship's deck. She had 2 choices: try to destroy the weapons on the ship, or prevent the ship from leaving. The first would be nearly impossible given the ship's size and the fact that she was one person with limited explosives. The second was more feasible. Elena positioned herself on a nearby warehouse roof with a clear view of the ship. Through her rifle scope, she could see the engine room, the bridge, and most importantly, the communication array. If she could disable the ship's ability to communicate and navigate, it would have to return to port. Her first shot took out the main radio antenna, a clean hit that sent sparks flying in the darkness. Her second shot shattered the GPS array. The third punctured the fuel line to the primary engine, causing diesel to spray across the deck. Alarms began blaring as the ship's crew realized they were under attack. Elena could see men running across the deck, some trying to spot the sniper, others working to contain the fuel leak. The ship's engines shut down as a safety precaution, but Elena wasn't finished. She had studied the port's operations during her reconnaissance, and she knew that any ship experiencing mechanical problems would be quarantined until port authorities could investigate. Her fourth shot triggered the ship's fire suppression system by hitting a heat sensor, covering the deck in foam and creating chaos. Within minutes, Coast Guard boats were racing toward the Northern Star. The weapons shipment wasn't going anywhere tonight. Now for the harder part. Elena had to get back to the mansion and deal with Henderson and his guests before they realized their operation had been compromised. The ride back seemed to take forever, snow whipping against her face as she pushed the motorcycle to its limits. She arrived to find the Christmas party still in full swing. Through the windows, she could see Henderson and the Colonel deep in conversation, completely unaware that their carefully planned operation was already falling apart. Elena ditched the motorcycle and made her way back into the mansion through the same route she had used to leave. But as she reached the servants' passages, she heard footsteps behind her. "Well, well," said a familiar voice. "If it isn't our dedicated maid. Out for a late-night ride." Elena turned to face Marcus Henderson, the teenage son who was supposed to be just a spoiled rich kid. But the gun in his hand and the cold calculation in his eyes told a different story. "You know, Maria," Marcus continued, using her fake name with obvious mockery, "my father didn't build this empire by being careless. We've been watching you for weeks, wondering why a maid needed to scout security routes and take such an interest in our private conversations." Elena's hand moved slowly toward her sidearm, but Marcus was young and quick. "I wouldn't," he warned. "There are 3 more men positioned around this room, all with very good aim." It was true. Elena could sense their presence now, could feel the laser sights trained on her from multiple angles. She had been so focused on the external threat that she had underestimated the enemy within. "The question is," Marcus said, stepping closer, "who are you really, and what did you do to our shipment?" Elena remained silent, calculating odds and looking for opportunities. She had been in worse situations, but not many. "No answer? That's fine. We have ways of making people talk." Marcus smiled, and it was his father's smile, cold and predatory. "But first, I think it's time you met our other guests. They're very interested in anyone who might interfere with their business." As Elena was marched at gunpoint toward the main parlor, she realized that her mission was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The weapons shipment might be delayed, but Henderson and his associates were still planning their attack. And now they knew they had an enemy in their midst. The parlor fell silent as Elena was brought in. Henderson looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "So," he said, setting down his champagne glass, "the maid isn't really a maid after all. How fascinating." He walked around her like a predator circling prey. "The question is, who sent you? CIA? Military intelligence? Or are you working alone?" The colonel stepped forward, studying Elena's face intently. "I know you," he said slowly. "Afghanistan. 2022. You were the sniper who took out 3 of my best operatives during that botched prisoner exchange." Elena finally spoke. "Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. Serial number 2847639. 1 Delta." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. These men knew that designation, knew what it meant. They were looking at one of the most elite warriors the American military had ever produced. Henderson laughed, but there was nervousness in it now. "Well, this changes things considerably. We're not dealing with some amateur spy. We're dealing with a genuine weapon. The question," the colonel said, "is what we do with this weapon. Now that we have it." Elena smiled for the first time that evening. They thought they had her trapped, that her mission was over. But they had made the same mistake everyone had made for the past 2 years. They had underestimated the maid. "My move," Elena said quietly, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The moment Elena spoke those words, everything changed. Henderson and his guests thought they understood the situation, thought they had cornered a dangerous but ultimately helpless enemy. They were about to learn why Navy SEALs are considered the most lethal operatives in the world. Elena had spent 2 years in this house, 2 years being invisible, 2 years planning for exactly this moment. They saw a maid who had stumbled into something beyond her capabilities. She saw a room full of targets who had just made their fatal mistake. The first thing they noticed was that the lights went out. Elena had modified the electrical system months ago during her cleaning duties, installing switches in the servants' passages that would cut power to specific rooms. The parlor plunged into darkness. And in that darkness, Elena Rodriguez became death incarnate. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had trained for combat in every possible environment. The laser sights that had been targeting her were now useless, painting red dots on empty walls. In the confusion, Elena dropped low and rolled behind Henderson's massive oak desk. "Light!" Henderson shouted. "Get the backup lights on!" But Elena had disabled those too. She knew every inch of this room, every piece of furniture, every hiding spot. Her enemies were stumbling around in unfamiliar darkness, while she moved like a predator in her natural habitat. The first guard went down silently, Elena's combat knife finding his throat before he could call out. She relieved him of his weapon and continued moving. The second guard fired blindly into the darkness, the muzzle flash revealing his position for the split second. Elena needed to put 2 rounds center mass. "She's picking us off," the colonel's voice cut through the darkness. "Everyone stay calm and move to the walls." It was good tactical thinking, but Elena was already 3 steps ahead. As the men felt their way to the walls, they walked directly into the positions she had prepared. Tripwires connected to flashbangs she had constructed from cleaning supplies and components stolen from the security systems. The room erupted in blinding light and deafening sound, disorienting everyone except Elena, who had closed her eyes and covered her ears at exactly the right moment. In the chaos that followed, Elena moved like a ghost. Marcus Henderson, the cocky teenager who had thought he was so clever, found himself face to face with a warrior who had survived 3 tours in the world's deadliest combat zones. His expensive pistol clattered to the floor as Elena disarmed him with a move that broke 2 of his fingers. "Please," he whispered, suddenly understanding that he was completely out of his depth. "I'm just a kid." "Tell that to the kids in those refugee camps you were planning to murder," Elena replied, but she didn't kill him. Instead, she used him as a human shield as she moved toward her primary targets. Henderson and the colonel had taken cover behind an overturned table, firing wildly into the darkness. Elena could hear them arguing, their careful partnership falling apart under pressure. "This is your fault, Henderson," the colonel hissed. "You said your security was foolproof. How was I supposed to know our maid was a Navy SEAL?" Henderson shot back. Elena decided to end their argument. She had 1 flashbang left, and she threw it with perfect precision. It landed right between them, and the explosion left both men stunned and helpless. When the smoke cleared and Elena had restored the lights, the scene in the parlor was devastating. Of the 12 men who had been planning mass murder just minutes earlier, 8 were dead, 3 were unconscious, and 1, Marcus Henderson, was cable-tied to a chair, crying and begging for his life. Henderson himself was alive but bleeding from shrapnel wounds. The colonel was unconscious but breathing. Elena had been surgical in her violence, taking out the immediate threats while keeping the key players alive for interrogation. "You wanted to know who I really am," Elena said, standing over Henderson as he tried to stop his wounds from bleeding. "I'm the woman who spent 2 years listening to you plan the murders of innocent people. I'm the soldier who took an oath to protect those who can't protect themselves. And I'm the last person you're going to see before you spend the rest of your life in prison." Elena zip-tied Henderson and the colonel, then began photographing documents and downloading files from Henderson's computer. She had evidence of arms deals spanning 3 continents, enough to bring down an entire network of criminals and corrupt officials. But her work wasn't finished. The weapons shipment at the port was delayed, not destroyed. Other ships might be dispatched, other routes might be found. Elena had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. She called a number she hadn't used in 2 years, a direct line to her former commanding officer, who had tried to help her when she first discovered the corruption that forced her into hiding. "This is Rodriguez," she said when the familiar voice answered. "I'm bringing you Christmas presents." 3 hours later, the mansion was swarming with federal agents. Henderson's network was being rounded up across multiple states, the weapons shipment was being confiscated as evidence, and the colonel was being transferred to a military detention facility. Elena stood in the kitchen where she had spent so many hours pretending to be someone she wasn't, watching as her former life as Maria Santos was finally laid to rest. Agent Sarah Chen, her former liaison with military intelligence, approached with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "So," Agent Chen said, "I guess the maid wasn't really just a maid after all." Elena took the coffee gratefully. It had been a long night, and she was exhausted in ways that went beyond the physical. "I tried to walk away, Sarah. I really did. I thought I could just disappear and let someone else fight the fights. But you couldn't," Chen observed. "Because that's not who you are. You're Elena Rodriguez, Navy SEAL. You don't run from fights. You end them." Elena nodded, looking around the kitchen one last time. "What happens now?" Now you come home. Your country needs soldiers like you, Elena. Real soldiers. Not the corrupted ones like Henderson and the colonel. The review board has cleared you of any wrongdoing in Afghanistan. Your record is spotless. Your service exemplary. And if I don't want to come back? If I just want to disappear again?" Chen smiled. "Then you disappear. But, somehow, I don't think that's what you want anymore." Elena thought about the past 2 years, about the feeling of being invisible, of wasting her skills while evil men planned atrocities. Then she thought about tonight, about the moment when she had stopped pretending to be helpless and remembered what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. "No," she said finally, "I don't think it is." As dawn broke over the Henderson mansion, Elena Rodriguez walked out the front door for the first time in 2 years. Not as Maria Santos the maid, but as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. She had traded her mop for her rifle, her invisibility for action, her hiding for heroism. The mansion behind her was a crime scene now, its secrets exposed, its owners facing justice. The refugee camps that would have been attacked were safe, their protectors warned and prepared. Henderson's network of arms dealers and killers was being dismantled, piece by piece. Elena climbed into the passenger seat of Agent Chen's car and looked back at the mansion one last time. For 2 years, she had been the invisible woman, the maid who cleaned up messes without anyone noticing. Tonight, she had cleaned up the biggest mess of all. "My move," she said quietly, echoing the words that had started everything. But this time, she wasn't declaring war on her enemies. She was declaring war on the idea that good people should stay hidden when evil people were making plans. As they drove away, Elena Rodriguez began planning her next mission. There were other arms dealers, other corrupt officials, other innocent people who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. She had spent 2 years learning to be invisible. Now it was time to be seen. The maid had become a soldier again, and the world was about to remember why Navy SEALs never really retire. They just wait for the right moment to remind everyone who they really are. Elena Rodriguez was done hiding. It was time to get back to work.